Have any of you here heard of a person by the name of Jordan Peterson? Okay, good, good. Jordan Peterson for those of you who don't know, is a clinical psychologist, world renowned. It's all over the internet. Has multi-millions of people have seen his YouTube videos and his talks and different things. He's written many papers. And he's been doing it for many, many years. He said one thing he can tell everybody, this one thing is absolutely true. No one ever gets away with anything. Not just some things, but no one ever gets away with anything. He says what happens is people twist reality. And then sometime down the road, something bad happens. Well, I'm a good guy. I've never done anything wrong. Why did this happen to me? Why me? And then they think, well, this caused this, and this caused this, and this caused this, and that's when I did this thing. Oh, yeah. That's why I'm living in a woodshed out by the river. I'm so stupid. I shouldn't have done this back then. And that's the way with all of us. And it's certainly true with me. I've got a lot of health problems today because I've done a lot of stupid stuff over my life. The church is kind of the same way, or at least history is the same way. People tend to do the same stupid things over and over and over again, and they expect different results. So, well, I'm going to do this stupid thing. It's going to work this time. Communism, if we just had enough money, it's going to work this time. No, it's not. Socialism, that'll work. It's communist light. No, that's not going to work either. We can see with the history of our country the way things have gone. This country, we were talking today in class how this country started out as a godly country. In the Declaration of Independence, it talks about these inalienable rights endowed by our Creator. It's talking about God. We have these rights given to us by God. Well, the government gave it. No, the government's just getting out of the way so God can give us these rights. And He did. And we started out very religious. You look at George Washington during the Battle of Mohegan. The people that saw him get through that, he literally, in this horrible battle, all of the officers were killed but him. He was rallying the troops to rescue, this was before the Revolutionary War, he was rescuing the British Army using his militia, and he did it. All the officers were killed. He rallied the men and got them out of there. One man wrote later to his wife, he says it was if the bullets refused to touch this man, because when he turned, you could see sunlight shining through his cloak, and this man was unharmed. The chief of the Indians that were going to kill him, that ruled all of the Indian tribes from Michigan down to the Ohio River and through Pennsylvania, he said he had to meet the one that the Great Spirit protected. Because up until that point, he had 17 braves who had not known how to miss, and all of them were firing at George Washington and could not hit him. And it had to be, in my words, the hand of God that protected him. Now, at the time, George Washington was a very religious individual, and many of the people in the United States were very religious at the time. He led his men in devotionals at night, and he did the eulogy for the soldiers that had died that night. He led them to safety, and they almost worshiped him. At one point in the Revolutionary War, several years later, we have a picture of George Washington on his knees praying. We get that picture from a man who was hired to assassinate the president, when the president at the time, General George Washington, was there to assassinate him. And when he heard his prayer, he was converted and started following General Washington. That's how pious this individual, that's how righteous he was. Another man that was righteous at that time was Benjamin Franklin. He gathered the horses and wagons for the Battle of Mohegan. The people said that we will not take the British word for this, because like today they didn't trust the government. We'll not take the British word that they'll repay us for the use of our wagons and horses. But if you guarantee them, we'll give them to you. And he did. He took his personal word on every one of those, and it absolutely bankrupted him, but he paid his bills. He was another righteous individual. His righteousness was passed on to his children and his grandchildren. Now, like George Washington, he got into things later that were not Christian. But at the time, he was a very pious religious man. His grandson was a gospel preacher and actually established many churches here in Indiana. One of them was in Middletown. But to be that as it may, like all of us, we have a certain nature that ebbs and flows. This nation was a righteous nation at one time, and later in time it became righteous again, prior to the Civil War. The righteousness of this nation demanded the freedom of slavery, or the end of slavery and the freedom of the slaves. And because of that, a bloody war was fought, because that sin could not be stood any longer. These cycles occur. We fall into depravity, and we raise up into righteousness again. It happened last in the 70s. We had a very spiritual uprising in the 70s, early 70s, at the end of a very tumultuous time where there was terrorism running around in the streets of these countries, wildness, protest, violence. Sound familiar? It's time for another awakening. It's time for this nation to wake up. And tonight, I offer you the invitation, but before I do, I ask each and every one of you to pray for this nation for the next 40 days. To pray that there's a awakening, that people will recognize their need for God. Because over and over again, we see this same tragedy occurring. What Jordan Peterson talked about, people do stupid stuff because they're not following the laws that God had established for all of us. They do stupid things, they get hurt, their lives are destroyed, and if they're lucky, they're just living by themselves, alone and miserable. If they're not lucky, they don't even have that much. But we can see the streets of our city and larger cities where there's people living on the streets. We can see in our city and other cities where there's violence and homelessness and all kinds of debauchery going on. And that shouldn't be in this country. So I ask you to pray for this nation.